Hey friends, welcome back. Hopefully this thing is on, working, functional, and everything is in place. My name's Timothy, and I'm a professional dungeon master running over 300 games of Dungeons and Dragons every year, and here today hoping to answer your questions. So we have a handful of questions that we got submitted earlier that we'll go through first, and then if you happen to have questions of your own, if you would go ahead and drop them into the chat, I'll do my best to get those at the end of the pre-scripted questions that have been sent my way from various sources, and we'll see how much we can cover in the time that we have together. If you happen to be dropping in and you're here in the chat, feel free to make some noise in the chat, say hi, all that good stuff, and we will otherwise go ahead and get ourselves underway. Uh, our first question is brought by tank class supporter Matt Laser, who asked in our members only Discord, what are some of the best campaign modules or even just individual pre written adventures, first or third party, that you have run or played? So, Matt, I tend to run. WotC modules. It's just sort of a personal preference of mine. I trust that a WotC module has had a fair amount of oversight. I hope that it's had some form of playtesting, and I have just over the years gotten kind of used to what they're going to put into a module that helps me to figure out what I need to add in order to get a good story. Because despite any concerns or questions or comments otherwise about how bad any one style of writer is versus another when it comes to different publishers, in my personal opinion, they all don't give me exactly what I want. And so I'm going to have to do some work no matter what. And so I can see the framework that I enjoy in any adventure. Now, that said, that just means that I'm going to be primarily hitting the shelf over here with the adventures on there that I've run. And of those, I would say that some of my favorites have got to be the anthologies. I really enjoy running the short single packaged adventures that have been coming out lately. Candlekeep's Mysteries and Keys of the Golden Vault would be two of my absolute favorites. The mystery style adventure and the heist style adventure are sort of subsets of their own when it comes to D&D, and so being able to have those kinds of stories that you can just quickly yank off the shelf and give a quick read through and throw into your campaign as filler for whatever else is going on, as side quests for anybody who's showing interest, or as you're going to build up on for things that you need in your homebrew campaign or other campaign. I just find that the anthologies are a great resource in that regard. I particularly think that Keys of the Golden Vault is well written in that they provide you with the actual elements that you're going to need in order to do a heist. So they also teach you a lot of those elements, like the partial maps and the additional information, the switcheroos over the information that you're giving versus what's actually going to happen. Those kinds of things are really, really well touched on in there, while the mystery adventures in Candlekeep can be a little bit more hit or miss in terms of how much of a mystery it feels like you're actually solving. But I like the sort of way that it styles itself in there. Uh, Outside of that, I would say that some of my other favorites are Curse of Strahd, simply as being a classic adventure with great themes and feels that really draws people in and gets people going on a specific a specific story. Then also, I'm a big fan of Storm King's Thunder as being something that sets the scene, gives you a world to work from, and then allows you to pick and choose the pieces of it that you're going to highlight in order to make the best story that you can. Uh, there's a sub question being thrown into the chat here from Rolando, who said that he was preparing to run Rime with the Frostmaiden, and that it could be made better by adding a lot of stuff, which is always true, most adventures. And if I've run the module, would love the opinion. So I have run Rime of the Frostmaiden, but I will caveat that it was in kind of an unusual situation uh, because I didn't get to run the first couple of chapters of the module as is, which I understand is actually some of the best portion of that adventure. But I jumped into it as a follow up to a Waterdeep uh, dragon heist adventure, and then we transitioned into Rime of the Frostmaiden. I like that adventure, and I think the story is really really excellent. But I did feel like that there were a couple of things that needed a fair bit of work to really shine. One of those was that you needed a ton of foreshadowing for Oral's fight to be interesting, and for her to be a major part of the campaign. You needed to input her into the campaign a little bit more, and when there was the occasion for some kind of a showdown with Oral, you needed people to know that there were the different forms that she could have and how they played out. By giving that information with previous encounters, particularly in one of the latter chapters in Grimscal, that really helped the encounter and helped make that final encounter exciting. Uh, and then the other thing is that the chapter about the dragon uh, didn't take into account movement rates. And so, unless your group has done something weird to be able to get past that, there's almost no way that that encounter is going to run in a satisfying fashion if you run it as written in the book. So, I highly recommend for that one that instead of having them be where they're supposed to be when that starts, that you have them be at the site of one of the villages when that's going to actually kick off, preferably one that's in the path of the destruction, and that you can see an easy side jog for them to be able to have an early encounter and then hustle their butts over to another location to be able to have a secondary encounter and hopefully success with the dragon. There's some real spoilers in that, I think, in some regards, but I tried to keep it pseudo vague. Those two things make a huge difference to how you're going to make that thing happen. Uh, Hey everybody, by the way, thanks so much. Great to have you here, and thanks for shouting out in the chats and keep that going. We're gonna move on to our next question now, which was pre-submitted through the link that you can find in every one of these Q&As and in a lot of my videos. It's signup.dmtimothy.com/Q&A, where you can leave a question for the next month's Q&A. So don't forget to do that if you don't get your question answered today, or if something comes to you while you're sitting on the toilet after the stream finishes, then that's probably a good time to break out your phone and leave the question. Just don't tell me that that's what you're doing. I don't really need to know. Anyway, John asked through that method, what advice do you have for in-person professional DMing? When I retire in about 15 years, I plan to go full on professional DM, but would prefer in person sessions. Any tips? So, my in person professional DMing is fairly light on. I largely do my stuff through startplaying.games and online, though they are working their way back into the meat space post COVID. But my general advice for professional DMing in person is that you are going to have to be really careful about where you're performing these kinds of things, where you're going to be going to do this. If you're going to be going into people's homes, you need to make sure that you're going into a safe space, that you have the materials that you need, that you're bringing everything you need. If you're bringing people into your home, then you need to make sure that these people are safe people to be bringing in, and that you have everything set up in a manner that gives that air of professionality. If you're doing it in a public space, then obviously you're going to have to make sure that you've got the costs for that worked into whatever it is that you're organizing. The largest and best thing that you can do when becoming a professional dungeon master is to treat it like it's going to be a business, and to actually think through all of those steps and to act in a manner that is professional. Another thing is that you're going to need to be very upfront about managing the expectations of people when they are coming into your home, meeting in that space, or you're coming to them. What are they supposed to have prepared? What are they bringing? What are you going to be bringing with you? What tools will you have available? What style of play will they be expecting? Uh, there's a lot of opportunity to potentially go into professional DMing in lots of awesome opportunities that I've seen out there recently, like going and being a player in a castle somewhere. That sounds super cool, and I would like to DM for that. Going and being a player on a D20 cruise, which did not intentionally have balloons pop up for it, but that would be pretty cool also. And those are a couple of the things that are starting to become the kind of event-based stuff that you could do as a professional DM. But it's not going to pay your bread and butter throughout the year, so you're going to have to build up a cadre. I would recommend for all styles of professional DMing to avoid the one shot mentality, which seems to be a lot of advice, is to just do lots of one shots to get experience and to get your word out there and that sort of thing. I would not say that that's a great path. Personally, I think that if you're going into one shots, you're going into occasions that you're just going to briefly get to know somebody and then have to start all over again. All of the hard part of making a good D&D session for people in a professional setting is done before the actual game shows up. And so if you can minimize how often you have to do that and instead focus on providing a good game week after week after week, not only will you have better experiences for your players, but you'll also have a much steadier income because you'll know that people are going to be coming week after week after week. So those would be just a couple of ideas that I would throw in there on that topic. Let's see. Roly, which I think might actually be somebody in the chat here today, but they prior to this did send in the question of how do you find a balance between what you think is fun and what your players think is fun? Aha, called it. Rolando, welcome. Uh, ooh, this one's a toughie sometimes, and it's actually a challenge that's it really hits kind of close to home for me today. This week I had a bit of an argument with my wife where she was you telling me the things that I don't do well at Dungeons and Dragons for her specifically, and it was emotional and unpleasant, and it definitely hit my automatic defensive stance and made me cringe quite a bit at the idea that I might be doing things wrong. But essentially what she was telling me was that she wasn't having as much fun as she would like, and that she thought I should be doing something different in order to fix that. And a lot of the time, her complaint is that I prioritize my way as being the right way that people will have fun versus what she wants in a game that she thinks is fun, uh, or that she thinks she will think is fun, which, not always the same thing. And so it is a delicate balancing act. It takes some work for us to to rein our own desire for fun in and find ways where there's overlap between what we think is going to be fun and what our players are enjoying. Now, I have often said, and I've read and heard and experienced that people are not necessarily sure what they're going to enjoy before they enjoy it, and we're not necessarily as human beings really great at distilling down why we had fun in and of itself for ourselves, but we know when we have fun and we know what we experience. And so one way to find that balance is to sit down and do sort of an after action report and figure out what we enjoyed about a session that we just had, and to sit down with our players and ask them, hey, what was your favorite things. It's touted as a safety tool that's used in a lot of spaces, the old stars and wishes, and basically after the session's over, what were your stars? What were the great things that you really liked, and what were your wishes? What would you have liked more of, or what would you have liked done differently in that session? Getting that information from your players, taking 5 minutes to quickly get that from people, can give you a lot of information to use in finding a balance between what you're enjoying and what your players are enjoying. The other aspect to that, and I've touched on this in a video recently, is just one of my ways of avoiding burnout and one of my ways of having fun is to be excited for my players. My players, though largely have come to me on a professional basis, they are my friends, and I love to see them succeed. I love to see them have fun, and so if they are having fun, it increases the amount of fun that I'm going to have, even with scenes that I otherwise wouldn't be as excited about. If I can hear the excitement from them, it's very contagious. And so if you're creating scenes and creating stuff that your players are having a great time with, you're probably on the right track to enjoying the game yourself. So don't stress too badly on that. Focus on letting them have fun and on finding the fun in that. And if you're not having fun, run less of what you're not having fun. Like that's just a thing. Just run less of whatever you actively are not enjoying. Even if they are enjoying themselves occasionally through it, your lack of excitement for it is probably going to be just as contagious as their excitement for something else would be for you. So the balance is really just in the doing. I'm not sure if that answers the question, Rolando, but I hope it helps a little bit, and I'd be happy to go in deeper on it at another time. That would be fine. Let's see. I'm gonna copy a quick comment out of the message bank here to put down for a little bit later, and say hi to a few people. Hey, Mastering Marv, welcome. Thanks for joining us, and amen on Gygax being unclear of what's fun. Everybody, nobody's terribly clear about what they enjoy. It's just a fact, and that's okay. Great comment. Thank you for that. Welcome, Alexi. And hey, Jake. All right, let's go on to the next one. Our next one, also in chat channel here, and one of my players is Spencer, who asked how to ad-lib campaigns when you want to extend a campaign to a higher level. So this is one of my personal this is just something I like doing. So it's something that I like to jump into, and something that I think is fun, because I think that most players would say that they would like to experience more high level play. Whether or not it's actually as enjoyable as low level play is an entirely different argument for an entirely different time. But most players would like to get to the cool abilities that they see at the end of the level progression and be able to test out the stuff that they've got going on. And I think that that makes sense and is fun. And it can be a real challenge to make that happen for people. Even when I've attempted to aim for level 20, there's been plenty of times that the campaign has dropped out just a little bit before people got to the finale, but the story finished, and it just wasn't right to continue to drag it out versus letting it have a satisfying conclusion, because that storyteller in me does desire some finality and a final good solution, right? But when it comes to making your campaign either after the main story's over or a ways to extend it in order to push it into that, I find that things like the anthology adventure books are incredibly useful for that, uh, as are third party stories, and generally just the creation of a plethora of hooks in the world around you. By creating a bunch of little hooks to stories that are related to what's going on in your world, by just spending a few minutes and saying, well, this is what's going on. What does that mean is happening? Right? By what is happening around here? Answering that question gives you opportunities to say to the players, this is what's happening around here, and see what lands. Find out what it is that people would like to explore, and then let them. This is one of the reasons why I don't really follow the railroad versus sandbox sort of argument, because my railroads drive through sandboxes. So if there's a storyline that has a plotted out thing, that doesn't mean that I'm not going to put a whole bunch of things on every side, and we're going to pull that train over no matter how strong the rails are, and we're going to go our own path. And eventually, we might come back to the main storyline, a couple of stops down the road, or it might just be that we get off and get back on. It doesn't really matter if you're putting hooks into the game, then people will follow the ones that are most interested to them. So really what matters from your perspective as the DM is making sure that you have inspiration for different ideas that you can hook out into the world for people to catch on to. Uh, and then on top of that, then you do need to add some progression to the later adventure stuff by moving things up. If you have an idea of when you want to finish something, you can't have your end game boss guy be a CR13 at one point and encounter the group, and then be a CR20 unless you've got something that accounts for the difference in between their power levels. So you do need to think ahead a little bit on that sort of thing. And then finally, ooh, I had a thought there. Uh, Boy, it has run away from me. I might have to come back to it a little bit later. Ad lib campaigns. Darn that. If you, yeah, anthologies, ideas, hooks, stay off script. Nope, I've lost it. All right, well, there goes that. If it comes back, I'll come back to you on that one, Spencer. I do apologize. Spencer had some other questions, but I'm going to move on and come back to those other ones, Spencer, just so that we are cognizant of time for other people there. All right, Alric, one of my players, asked, what is an improvement or fix you would apply to the base Artificer class in terms of class abilities or magic? I gotta admit, I would not do a ton to the Artificer in terms of trying to improve them. They are actually quite potent and decent if you're using all of their abilities. They've got some great abilities that lead to some pretty fantastic play, and the artificers that have run through my tables have all been very valid members of their parties, contributing quite a bit. I would say that one area where the artificer lacks, and that it can be what I see as a frustration for players, is that they don't have much that interacts with the short rest mechanic, which admittedly is also true for several other classes, but in the artificer's case, it is a complete lack of touch into the short rest mechanics. So if I was going to do like a complete rewrite and the like, I would potentially try to even that out a little bit, which is probably something I would try to do for most classes, would be give them at least some small motivation to desire a short rest, so that it's not always a warlock versus wizard argument at the table about whether or not we're going to take a rest. uh, that would be something I wouldn't mind. Otherwise, I would probably be looking to tone things down a little, or find a way to give artificers abilities that uh, didn't take opportunities away from the DM when it came to the loot. I love the fact that artificers can create magic items, but because they can just pick and choose whatever it is they feel like on the infusions list, and then build out just the perfect thing that everybody else is having to rely on random tables and the loot that's in the adventure, the artificer becomes sort of a workaround for the DM's decision making process, which can be troublesome at times, because it creates imbalances with party levels and party magic. Alric, in perfect example here, is playing in my Curse of Strahd campaign with a Artificer, and Curse of Strahd is notoriously low wealth, low loot, low magic as a campaign structure, and an Artificer walks out onto the field and says, "Well, I'm going to make a bag of holding, and I'd like to have a +1 shield and a +1 weapon that automatically creates its own ammunition." And it's kind of like bringing a druid to Tomb of Annihilation. Wandering through the jungles of Chult just isn't quite as worrisome when you've got Goodberry and Create Water handy. Uh, Artificer has that same sort of uh, issue, if you want to call it an issue at all. As for how would I want the subclasses to help accentuate the abilities and roles of each, which was his secondary portion to his question, is I would really like to see alchemists being boosted to be more cool and alchemical. And overall, I would like to see all of the classes maybe have a limited list of access to magic items that fit their specific themes, with obvious crossover for things that go into the list there, and maybe either more stringent level requirements on some of the stuff, or ways for us to like give the recipe to players the same way that you would give scrolls to a wizard. I think that that would go a long way for making artificers cool if they could find a recipe for a legendary item and could then make an infusion with it, but that normally they were stuck with common and uncommon kind of items. And so the high level items and the real game changers and movers and shakers were something that the DM could have some say over and could reward the player with, because that feeling of reward is important. And when we get to pick it for ourselves, we get the power feel, which is great for many different players, but we don't get the reward feel anymore. And so that's kind of a bummer. Ashen Gaming, aka Ozzy, has a question that also he threw into the chat, though he doesn't know it. He asked, what race and class combination, in your opinion, is the most hassle for a DM to run? And then he asked in the chat, how would you fix Echo Knight? And so I don't, that right there fixes the other half of his question, in that Echo Knight is probably the current playable option that is most irritating at the table in terms of properly adjudicating the rules, and so it's the most hassle for the DM, in that you have to make a whole bunch of decisions at various points, and you can't always see the consequences of those decisions until a player like jumps onto the ruling that you've made and runs with it as far as they possibly can. Echo Knight, because it is a magical object, which you have to run down a weird rabbit hole just to find out, is immune to a whole bunch of things that don't make a bunch of sense in the fiction. The fact that it can move in any direction, because it doesn't specifically say has a move speed, or that it's on the land, means it can fly, and your warrior can just attack wherever. It essentially removes all of the usual restrictions on fighters and lets them do whatever their heart's desire is, which is cool in limited doses, but in the unlimited nature that it is, and with all the questions left open by not knowing exactly how it moves, whether it occupies its space, what spells are going to work or not work against it, et cetera, it can be a bit of a challenge. To answer the how would you fix Echo Knight, the simple thing that I would do is to make it a 1 hit point creature and make it walk, unless you could fly. Make it use your movement rate, which would actually make it faster sometimes, and make it be a creature, so they could be targeted like a creature without it not making sense. And pretty much all of the other stuff would pretty much fall into line. It could have more potency in some regards by allowing it to be a creature, but if it's a creature, it answers the questions. Because as a creature, it can open doors, whereas right now it doesn't technically have the ability to open doors. It has the ability to make attack actions through it as if you're there. So you can bust down a door, but you can't turn the handle, right? Lots of weird little things like that that are just not answered by the way the rules are written. Thanks for the question, Ozzy. I appreciate that. And when it comes to race, my least favorite are any race that has unlimited flight, with a side note to any creature that has climb speed at first level. Also, not because they are completely and utterly busted or anything, but because at low levels they just invalidate a lot of standard play scenarios uh, that are otherwise interesting and or fun. And so I'm not a fan of those. Uh, Mr. DeFacia, which I'm probably saying that wrong, DeFacia. I always get that wrong. Dang it. I think I did this last time. Asked, how do you decide when to drop from initiative when an interruption comes up, like reinforcements arriving or the last enemy combatants fleeing the scene? Oh, this one is a challenge, and it's definitely more art than science. I don't think that there's an answer that's going to give you a on turn X. Uh, what I usually do when a scene comes up that we switch clearly, like the battle has switched to where the tension has departed, that's your big key that you should be looking for the opportunity to get yourself out of initiative as swiftly as you can. Uh, because if there is no tension in resolving the scene, then it's not a scene worth continuing. That said, you don't want to tell people that their scene wasn't interesting, and you don't want them to be uh, you don't want them to be bored with what's going on, and you're stuck sort of working your way in between those those situations. So when the tension has drained out and your reinforcements arrive, and it's clear that you're going to win this battle, at that point, what I usually do is ask the group as a whole, all right, your reinforcements have arrived, and it is clear that the battle is going to go your way and that you are no longer in any danger. Does anybody have any immediate actions that they need to resolve before we drop initiative? And if somebody says yes, then run it through to that point, get that done. Likewise, the enemy is fleeing and running away. Are you allowing them to run, or do you wish to chase them down? If they want to chase them down, are you giving quarter, or are you killing them? Are you giving quarter, or are you killing them? And maybe give them narrative control. One thing you don't want to do is talk too much about the uh, specifics of the rules. Like, the less we can talk about initiative, the better our story is going to be when we're dropping out of it. So if we can ask if they're giving quarter or allowing them to flee, getting that answer then allows us to just move out of initiative without even really mentioning it. We're just, they're fleeing. Are you giving quarter, or are you chasing them down? You're chasing them down. You chase them down, leaping upon them as they flee away, and roll some dice. You manage to kill them, or this many manage to escape, or none manage to escape. It's usually best, if anybody's got a chance to escape, that you let the players work it out round by round, unfortunately, because escaping creatures tick players off. I hope that helps to answer the question, Mr. DeFacia. Hey, Ashen Gaming, thanks so much for your super. That's way too kind of you. I really, really appreciate it. You guys keep the lights on around here and help to do things like get better lights and get an editor so that I can put out more of these videos, and hopefully better ones. Because doing this all on my own has been a bit of a thing. So your help is appreciated. Thank you so much. Your support means a lot. All right. Jumping. Hey, my pleasure. My pleasure for the answer there, Mr. DeFacia. No worries at all. And let's dive in. We had a couple more questions from Spencer. And then if you've got more questions, then I would really appreciate it if you would drop them into the chat, because we are going to be looking to get as many answered today as we can. So, from Spencer, how can we get players more active in downtime or role play channels? And secondarily to that, what if you had rooms in your Discord server, for instance, for all players that reflect, taverns and promenades, other locations? So I've done a little bit of this with different levels of success depending upon the players that are involved. Because some people are busy and they don't actually want to play between weeks. Um, I know that might seem weird to us DMs, but yeah, some people have got a lot going on and they just want to show up on game day and have fun on game day, and then forget about it until next time. Right? This is just their decompress. Don't push those people too hard into being there because you're going to make it feel like work for them, and they want it to be their play. So it's okay if your players are this way. Uh, but having channels in something like Discord or group text messages for live games, or other means of communicating outside of the game can add a ton. Also, having the opportunity for players to come to you with things that they would like to accomplish during their downtime would is can lead you into grander and grander stories as you resolve their out of character interests, and you're able to push things forward into the main story for when things come back together without spending a ton of time on something that might only interest one player or another one. Uh, that can be a big thing. So when you're trying to encourage this, there's a couple of things to realize. One is that the only way you're going to encourage this to happen is to use your words and encourage it to happen. If you just wait for it to happen, it'll happen sometimes. You create the rooms, and sometimes they'll get used. Some of your players are going to be more excited to do that kind of thing than others. There's going to be some moments where that kind of thing comes up. But if you want it to happen, then you should probably instigate it. Just like you would instigate a scene around the campfire for a traveling montage. If you wanted to have that moment at the campfire, you don't usually wait until somebody says, wait, 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 stop. During these 3 days of travel, can we have a scene around the campfire where Jim and Jill are chatting to one another and there's some spooky noise in the background? No, 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 no. You have to be the one to instigate that scene, right? So if you're the one instigating that scene in a live game, then why wouldn't that be you instigating the scene during the downtime? So that means that you have to put in the time to give the prompt, to ping out the people that are going to be active in the scene and to put them in there, and potentially to portray any NPC that might be involved, and to otherwise run that scene. So it's an additional time sink on you that can be very rewarding. The other important point about trying to get players more active in downtime is that there needs to be downtime. It can be very like cognitively problematic for people to be trying to think about their current character with all the information that they've gained and all the situations that are going on in their lives in a situation that is not the current situation that their characters are in. So if they're in the midst of a dungeon and you paused right before the action of your next session, it's going to be very, very challenging for your players to have a conversation about the night before and just sitting around the campfire talking, or thinking ahead and trying to figure out what they're doing for some kind of a downtime action the next time they go to town. So one solution to those problems is, as it's often presented more in like West Marches style campaigns, is using one-to-one time, where essentially days that pass in the real world are days that pass in the game world. It's not a common format for Dungeons and Dragons nowadays compared to what it used to be, though it's still obviously out there and alive. But having campaigns where you have a week in between your adventures and you go out, adventure for a little bit, and then fight your way back to a campground or the like, can in allow you to have that opportunity for like, okay, well, you're back at camp and you're resting and recovering. Maybe you're using the gritty realism rules to where your long rests take that whole week, so you're getting the rest in between these two days of adventuring into a dungeon. What are you doing while you're in there? What are you doing around your camp? What are you spending your nights on? What kind of conversations are you having? And people will naturally want to spend some of their thinking time about what their character is doing in order to push forward their own personal agendas, their stories, the interests and thoughts that they might have. If they don't have that downtime, then they can't spend that downtime. And so they're not going to spend their thought thinking about that downtime unless they've got that opportunity. So sometimes the cart comes before the horse, or we try to put the cart before the horse, where we try to say, "Hey, why don't you guys spend any time on downtime?" And players will invariably reply, "Well, when did we have downtime that wasn't like at the table, like and resolved in 5 minutes as we tried to hurry through it to get to the good bits?" Right? You need to make sure that you're setting up the end of your session with a downtime period following, and then you're following up with people to make it happen, and then keeping it regular makes a big difference. All right, that's it for the questions that we had pre-applied. Spencer, I hope that helps, and let's dive into the chat and see what answers we can rock out. Jacob, hey Jake, great to see you. Have you considered running a campaign that involves large army-sized conflicts, perhaps with the players each running their own legion, group of soldiers within the army? What are your thoughts on it? So, Dungeons and Dragons does not do large combat nearly as well as it does small scale combat, which is why, like the original Dungeons and Dragons was a game to play with your individual characters so that you could build up to the point where you gathered your armies and then you went and played a completely different game in order to continue the story forward in your nation versus nation conflicts. I think it was called Chainmail was the game back then, and obviously that's actually still an option for Dungeons and Dragons, even though people don't necessarily play that way anymore. But you can still just run a army scale conflict using a completely different rule set, and things work out just fine doing something like that. So for me, I'd probably fall back on Warhammer just because it's near and dear to my heart, and Warhammer Fantasy has close enough in terms of like lore and stylings to be able to make it feel D&D-ish. But there's also a lot of great supplements out there, some more well thought out than others, as to ways to take your D&D and turn it into large scale conflicts. It is definitely something that I have considered frequently, because I feel like it would be a load of fun. Um, I don't think that I would go with necessarily the approach of the players each running their own legion or group of soldiers, um, simply because it can get bogged down. Depending on how you run things, something like that could be as the main drop of the main portion of the game, regardless of how you do it. You're just going to need some kind of rules set for it, and that's a lot of homebrewing to bring that to life. I definitely prefer the like narrative backdrop setting of large scale combat and the individualized mission approach for your PCs, how they can interact with the battlefield and change things. But that isn't to say that you can't mix and match both together a little bit, especially at high levels. Spells and characters can be completely game changing on the battlefield. Meteor Storm is obviously intended for battlefield destruction, not the destruction of people in a 20 by 20 room. And so you can utilize those kinds of game changers with great narrative effect and can work things out. There's a lot of advice out there and different ways to run those kinds of things, and I think that it's valuable because A lot of the older character styles that we haven't played as much as we do nowadays are based around characters that gather loot in order to get important, and then once they become important, they have the means of interacting on a more nation by nation or stronghold versus stronghold or those kinds of methods, and uh, it can be a lot of fun. So people need to be able to get into it. I just think that if you were trying to run uh, individual legions or the like, that you would want to make sure you had a whole lot of D20 sitting around to be able to resolve it, or you simplified the system so vastly that it became a matter of like individual unit success on a single attack roll to smooth things down as much as possible. There's a book that was recommended to me not terribly long ago called The Living Campaign by John here it is by John N. McGowan. And I've almost finished that book. And in it, he had some reasonably simplified rules for making that kind of combat possible. I also picked up the Strongholds and Followers by Matthew Colville, uh, which has some much more complicated rules for the same stuff. The bones of Strongholds and Followers is better than the bones of the Living Campaign, but the math and implementation of Strongholds and Followers is overcomplicated above and beyond what it needs to be in order to make a good scenario. It is essentially playing a completely different game than Dungeons and Dragons, and with with a lot of messy stuff in there. The Dragonlance campaign does have some interesting stuff on that. I haven't read through that book to be able to give a yay or nay either way, though my glance at it suggested that basically if you're going to be running the actual events of combat and the big campaign level stuff, you were again hieing back to the roots of D&D and playing a different game for a brief little while with the attached board game instead of just running them in Dungeons and Dragons. Anyway, I don't I would love to see Jake, you mentioned a D20 episode where they did some homebrew army battles. I would be delighted to see what Dimension 20 pulled out. And thank you for asking the question. All right, we've had a number of comments here, but not if I don't see any questions. Oh, Alexi, that J at the end makes me think I'm butchering your name. I apologize. Do you think that multi-classing is balanced? If not, what would you do differently? Great question. So the short answer is sometimes. uh, multi-classing is not balanced, but neither are classes. And that's actually kind of by design. Multi-classing individual characters should be able to work alongside one another in a fashion that means that they are of similar power levels, but they should not be equally viable in all situations. Not even close. There should be moments in any game where the wizard makes the fighter look bad, and there should be moments in any game where the fighter makes the wizard look bad, and that's by design. So a certain degree of unbalanced is important in that regard. When it comes to multi-classing, for in the big imbalance to multi-classing is that multi-classing introduces such a huge number of variables that it is possible to game together those variables in order to create outlying characters that are so much more powerful in so many more situations than other characters are going to be able to be powerful in, that they by nature become the best choice, and they are enough the best choice that they become the only choice for running that style of character. That's the big danger of multiclassing. It's also the big danger of feat bloat, power creep, and all character creation. Anytime that something is put into the game, if it becomes so good that nobody in their right mind would not take it, that's a problem in my book. And so multiclassing as a balance problem for me is all about the low level dips. Jake is calling himself out there in the chat, and he's not wrong. There are a lot of front loaded classes that if you take one level of this class, or two levels maybe tops, if you take one or two levels in this class, you gain access to the majority of their cool stuff, and in particular, the kinds of things that can completely change the way you play, or can completely remove a weakness that your main class otherwise has. The primary examples that come into play there, you're talking uh, the Hexblade Paladin or Hexblade Sorcerer, who he takes that one level dip in Hexblade Warlock in order to be able to make their attack rolls with charisma, so that they can be the armored character with a full spell casting class that is up close, max armor class, and is also able to fight up close or at range with equal propensity, and has access to the sorcerer's spell list, which is the second best spell list in the game. Or the paladin side of that, where the hexblade level means that the paladin no longer relies on multiple stats, but only needs to have a good charisma, and they can dump their strength down a little bit and never worry about it again. Uh, because that one level offsets that, it completely changes the paradigm for the class and takes away a built-in tension when it comes to the power level of the creature. Uh, on top of that one, the wizard cleric, one level of cleric, particularly something like forge cleric, or the other ones that give heavy armor proficiency, that takes away the fact that the wizard, with its best spellcasting class in the entire game, best spell list for sure, uh, has the highest armor class now, as well as being able to take the best spell list. So those weaknesses that are built into the class, when they're completely overcome by a one level dip into another class, that is not a good balance design, in my personal opinion. As Spencer mentioned in the chat there, I've implemented Treant Monk's 3 rules with some slight modifications, and run well over 300 games now with those rules intact, and they fix that problem for me. Now, I do think that they do increase marshals just a little bit more than is necessary, or was necessary at my tables, for those people who lean hard into the rules for taking -5 to +10 to their attacks without having to have great weapon master or sharpshooter. It does build them up just a little bit on the high side in terms of damage dealing for the group's output, but I think that that's an acceptable stance to get them feeling on par with the other with the wizards and the other spellcasters, while also keeping them from having to be a a two-handed weapon fighter in order to be optimal like everybody else. So if your group is heavy on optimal, then I think that that one's a big deal. What would I do differently? I would move anything that is going to change the paradigm of another class to 3rd level. Uh, for instance, Hexblade is literally fixed in 2024. If the only thing that changed was moving your when do you pick your warlock type to level 3, then when you pick Hexblade and you gain medium armor proficiency, shield proficiency, and charisma attack rolls, if you had to sacrifice 3 levels of your class to do that, that's at least better. It at least costs something to get that benefit, and has some kind of real tangible cost to it, instead of that one level dip. It's still a little on the strong side for certain classes, because it synergizes so well with both the sorcerer and with the paladin, but it at least has a certain cost. So I would move those kinds of things to third level. And by moving them to third level, I feel like that would make a big difference. Or I would put in Treant Monk's rules that required you, for instance, to only cast spells using the armor that you were proficient in with the class that gave you the spell. That makes a huge difference to leveling things out. Highly recommend going and checking out my video and his video on the Treant Monk rules topic. All right, let's see. We've only got a few minutes left and we've got 2 questions in the chat. So let's take a look. How would you run a player-centric battle to the death situation? Like the players are captured and forced to fight in an arena for the amusement of, say, Strahd von Zarovich or some other big baddie. This is a touchy scene to run. Uh, One of the first steps to running the scene, and it's kind of a yuck one for a lot of people, would be to get player buy-in. If players are on board with this and they're willing to lose their character, then great. If they're not on board with this, then you're in a bad spot and you've put yourself in a bad spot. I would create a way, like in many good action movies, for this to get turned around to where you're pit into an arena and you're supposed to fight to the death, but instead you turn the tables and escape, or manage to call out the Lord and make him look bad in front of people to where he comes down and fights you instead. Find another way for the most part. Uh, D&D is a team sport, and it is important that the players are not being willy-nilly pitted against the other players, and that you're taking away complete agency from them in that fashion. 9 times out of 10, that will go bad and feel bad. There are groups where it'll fly. In those groups, they should know that there's a chance that this is coming. They should have preferably the opportunity to build another character before they show up to that session, so that if they do pass on, you've already got hooks in ready to pull in their next character. But you've got to be really, really careful with a hook like that. That can go bad in so many different ways. That one probably requires a much longer answer there, Ozzy, but I hope that that blunt answer at least covers the majority for you. One of the last questions. Here we go, Jake. Having run multiple campaigns, some allowing a free feat and some not allowing them, what have been your findings on it? Do you lean more towards one way or the other in terms of what you like? Yes. So my findings on this is that a free feat or a feat at first level is great. It feels good. It makes characters more nuanced and interesting. It helps to differentiate between 2 first level characters of the same class or same style, and it's just a fun part of the game. Feat design and taking feats is a fun part of D&D. Even though it's an optional rule in 2024, it's so widely used that I think it could be considered a part of the basic rules. And in 2024, I think it will be. From the looks of things, they're not planning on giving the no feat option anymore that they were looking to do when they came out with 5e, which I think was simply just a nod towards the idea of simplification. I don't know if it'll be put out in 2024 or if they're going to get rid of it. But uh, what I think is that what D&D 2024 is doing is the right approach, which is to make lists of feats that are okay at different levels of the game, because that has been the darker downside to the free feat game, is that some feats are so much better than other feats that if you can take one at first level, it makes you better and it breaks the math of the game the way it's been designed. And I think that that's a big issue, because uh, not only could you not get a certain stat options in 2014 when the books first came out, you literally, the only option to get a free feat was to get one as a human, which meant that you're already sacrificing a +1 to a stat. So taking a feat that gave you a +1 to a stat just brought you up to everybody else in terms of overall statistical numbers. Uh, once Tasha's came out and introduced the opportunity for people to get free feats for nothing, and add that on top of the usual +2, +1, you started to get people getting +3s into a stat and pushing into 18s right off the bat without having to roll stats, which wasn't previously uh, actually a possible thing. And that there is an issue when you're dealing with a system like D&D that is designed as bounded accuracy. I know there's a lot of talk out there about how bounded accuracy is broken and it doesn't actually work, but the actual intent of it is to have a bounded baseline, not a binding that lasts forever. And so you are supposed to be able to break outside of the rules of it with magic items and feats and builds and ideas, but the baseline, free feats without any kind of restrictions, does not allow that baseline to stay where it was. And that's my only dark downside issue that I've had with telling people that if they give me a backstory, I'll give them a free feat. Uh, Other than that, it has been a positive experience all around. And I'm looking forward to having a listing of what feats belong in what level of play for 2024, and being able to still offer people the free feat that backgrounds are now going to give instead of background features, which are going to be going away. I think that's a solid move in the right direction, and I think that it will feel even better in play while also keeping uh, the bounded accuracy system more intact than it currently is. Um, all right, we are sitting here on our time right now. I hope that answers your question, Jake. Charlie did ask at the end there if I wanted to talk about how I developed a community around D&D. I will just say on that topic as I close that I love talking about Dungeons and Dragons, and I love my players. And so creating a community around D&D has just been about including people in conversations and enjoying having their input, laughing with them, having a good time, mixing and matching tables together with different people so that people get to know one another, and giving people a space to share. My players have been the ones who've created a community, and all I've done is been the link between them and other awesome people playing this awesome game. And if you would like to be a part of that, then keep in mind that all supporters on my YouTube channel do get access to my otherwise players only Discord channel. So if you want to come on in and check it out, then go ahead and look for the join button down below this video. And if you've got questions for next Q&A, remember, sign up.dmtimothy.com/Q&A. And I'll leave the link to that in the description below. And I look forward to seeing you all again. Thanks for watching. Happy adventuring.